I just said.
He was in Vegas, right? Trust the engineer.
Y'all all enjoy your laugh.
Good evening. We are standing at the tomb of Marie Helene Ladner, who was the great-granddaughter of Louis Christian Ladner. He was the very first Ladner ever to settle on the Mississippi Gulf Coast back in 1719. And this young Swiss man was only 20 years old when he came here, and he was a pirate at that. I am Gladys, Missouri Ladner. Louis Christian Ladner was my great-grandfather also 7 generations back. But I think I inherited his adventurous spirit because I traveled around the world 7 times over. I was a career woman and part owner and operator of Ladner's Fishermans Wharf restaurant in Biloxi, along with Roland and Neva Ladner, my brother and sister-in-law. Most locals just called it the Wharf. I was born in 1904 in Lumberton, Mississippi, to Cass Ladner and Lily Thomas Ladner. And there's a picture up here of my mother and myself and a couple other people we'll talk about here. So I was born to Cass and Lily, and they had 8 children. Now my father had a great deal of land up there that he farmed, and my mother taught school and took care of this large family. My mother was a quiet, thoughtful person, but her greatest attribute was her strength. Her strength was the glue that held us together during very many trials and difficult times. You see, in the early 1920s, my father was introduced to Brother Isaiah, who claimed to be a holy man, a healer. His real name was John Cudney, and he was a con man who started a cult. He built a commune in the St. Martin area. My father handed over all of his property, his savings, his life to this fraud. He moved us from Lumberton down to the coast to be close to Brother Isaiah. My mother went to work in the seafood factories to provide for the children. Now, 10 years later, when Cudney died in California, his followers sat vigil at his grave for 3 days because he promised he was going to rise from the dead. By that time, I had left Biloxi and moved up to Chicago to find work. But it was just a permanent mark on our family. We had, it was irreversible what happened to our family with that. Now, my first position in Chicago was with the Palmer House Hilton Hotel. Excuse me. I was a quick learner, and so I was very quickly promoted, and I moved higher and higher up the corporate ladder. I sent for Mama and my 2 youngest siblings, Roland and Hattie Ray, to come and stay with me. They would come and visit for the summers, but I couldn't convince them to stay, and I think it might have had to do with the Chicago winters. But I was able to buy them a house in a new neighborhood in Biloxi on Briarfield Avenue. And eventually, Roland did decide to move up to Chicago to seek work and live with me. So things for our family were looking up. Now, I moved back to Biloxi to care for my aging mother. Roland and his bride, Neva, also moved back to Biloxi, and Roland began managing Fishermans Wharf in Biloxi, which at the time was a fishing camp with a pier. They provided things like live bait and boat rentals. Now, he and Neva bought a small oyster factory near Factory Row on Front Beach, and he ran it as his own fishing camp. Eventually, we started serving fresh boiled seafood right on the pier. It was, although I traveled all over the world, this trip to San Francisco was what stuck in my mind. The idea that a fisherman could bring his fresh catch to the pier and have it offloaded directly to a restaurant and then served to waiting customers that very same day, that was an idea we just couldn't ignore. So around 1957, we had made an addition to the pier that we called the Island Room. It was a screened-in porch with a much bigger menu. So Ladner's Fisherman's Wharf restaurant was open for business. We all worked night and day to make it a success. It was open seasonally to the public. At that time, I also bought a very charming older home near the corner of Oak Street and Beach Boulevard. I renovated that home and I filled it with antiques and souvenirs that I'd collected from around the world. And Roland and Neva lived in the home next door. I also bought a stretch of beach that was right across the street from me. At that time, we decided that we were going to keep the restaurant open, but we had a difficult time because Roland, we lost him to cancer in 1964. He was only 48 years old, and he had 2 young children, Victor and Risa. And Risa is the baby here, and she's the one who brought these lovely items for us to show today. But they were very young at the time. Now the restaurant was doing beautifully. It was so busy all the time. We were having a great time with the restaurant. And Neva and I just kept moving forward because that's what Roland would have wanted. 5 years later, in 1969, Hurricane Camille hit the Gulf Coast and changed it forever. The devastation was horribly cruel, disfiguring our beautiful Biloxi. So much loss of life and property. We lost the wharf, and I lost my home. But Neva took the reins, and in 1971, she contracted with the U.S. Corps of Engineers to build a brand new Ladner's Fisherman's Wharf restaurant on that stretch of beach that I had bought so many years earlier. That restaurant was located just 2 miles east of the beautiful Biloxi Lighthouse, and we had a stunning view of Deer Island. It was very quaint inside. We had fishermen's nets all over the walls. We had candles on every table. We had little red and white checked dish towels that we used as our napkins. And at every seating, we had a little finger bowl with tiny slices of lemon in them. But the star of the show was the freshest of fresh fish. We had flounder and crabs and shrimp and oysters. If it inhabited the Gulf of Mexico, we served it. And we also had this delicious white sauce. We had it at every table. It was our very own original recipe, and everyone loved it. I had a nephew who would come to the restaurant while he was waiting for his meal. He would put that sauce, that white sauce, on little crackers and just sit there and eat that until his meal came. It was that good.
I did that too.
You did that too? I love it. That's wonderful. It was delicious white sauce. Everyone loved it. And now the people of Biloxi just flooded our doors. When we reopened, it was like having an old friend come back home again. And people had missed our broiled stuffed flounder, our West Indies salad, and we also had, of course, the fried shrimp and oysters on the half shell. Around 1975, Neva and I decided that our restaurant days had come to an end, and we sold to the Aldrich family. Now the Aldriches, we had worked with them for years, so they knew all our secrets. And that famous pie that you might have tried, that was an Aldrich family edition, and a great one it was. The Aldriches also served President Ford when he came through on his campaign trail. Oh, Vic. Victor, is that you?
Hey, Gladys? Guess I missed her. Hi there, y'all. I'm Victor Ladner. I was the son of Roland and Neva Ladner. And, we actually lived right next door to my Aunt Gladys, across Highway 90 from the wharf. Now, my beautiful little sister Risa, you can see her in this picture, she was the youngest. And now, to tell you all the truth, I feel like I grew up on the pier. I was always down there, I was at the wharf all the time, and I was the one that they had do all the odd jobs. I bussed the tables, I took out the trash, and take a guess who hauled all that freshest of the fresh seafood up from the pier to the kitchen. Now, on occasion, I was known to, how does one say, make myself scarce. But after all, the house was right across the highway, and restaurant work is hard work. But on average, most of the time, you could always find me down there, and I was always taking care of business. Now, my Aunt Gladys, she was really being a little bit humble, only bringing up the Aldriches, because there's not a shortage of restaurants here on the Gulf Coast and people who run them who could tell you that they haven't taken a cue from the Fisherman's Wharf and Gladys Ladner. One story in particular comes to my mind of a young man named Bobby. His famous mother was the one that sent him on his way down to the wharf and got Aunt Gladys involved. See, she figured that if her son was ever going to take over the family business one day, he ought to learn the ropes from somebody that he might listen to, somebody who wasn't his own mother, you know? And so she sent him on his way down to the wharf, and I guess history has proven Miss Mary right once again, because now Bobby is the owner and operator of Mary Mahoney's Old French House, the oldest continually operating restaurant in Biloxi. Now, my Aunt Gladys, she was just such a special person. I mean, it's hard for me to tell y'all everything there is to tell you about her, but I remember the most important lesson she ever taught me, and she taught me so many of them, but most important lesson she ever taught me is I was about that age when she started telling me this. She told me that all people, everybody, they just want to feel like they're special, like they're somebody, you know? And I remember one day she got a little bit frustrated with me, and she sat me down. She said, Vic, all you have to do is look them in the eyes, smile real big, and find something nice to say. Here's the thing, I tried my best. But Aunt Gladys, she was so much better at it than I ever was. She had this way about her, you know, she had this way with people, and I can see her now, and man. You know, I feel like from a young age, I was destined to lose everybody that I ever loved. We lost Daddy when I was 11 years old. And we lost Grandma Ladner when I was 19, and 1977, I'll never forget it. I was 24 years old. We lost Aunt Gladys. I'll never forget the day they called me. And it wasn't telling me she had died. It was about someone else. See, Gladys had made another decision before she passed on. And she chose to donate her eyes to the Mississippi Lions Eye Bank in Jackson, Mississippi. Because of her, 2 people had their vision completely restored. And, you know, she didn't have any kids, and she'd never married, but she had wrote me down as her next of kin, because any of her nieces and nephews, any of them could tell you what an amazingly kind and generous and loving woman she was. Just an amazing aunt. And, you know, I died myself in 2001. I was 49 years old, just a little bit older than Daddy when he passed on. But the thing I want people to take away from tonight, from our story, from the story of the wharf and of my family, is really that the sacrifices that my Aunt Gladys made for the wharf, for her family, and then there at the end of her life for people that she'd never even met. And I hope that someone here today might choose to make the same sacrifice that they might give it all for their family, for their passion, and that when their time comes around, they might give the same gift Aunt Gladys gave. They might pass on that gift of sight. I want to thank y'all all for coming out tonight.